So it makes no sense to go and draw something if you don't want to draw it when you're not even going to make a lot of money doing it anyways. It just logically draw the thing that you're going to be passionate about, what you want to do.
Hey, thanks for listening. Last week was a bit of a challenge between client work and writing. Not complaining about having client work because I do like to eat, but it's really tough when to choose into the thing that you want to do. And anybody who makes something of their own knows this probably more than I do. It's just one of those weeks where you would have a great day of writing. The next day, you'd just be stuck on phone calls and answering emails and doing the worky work to make emails and the phone calls stop. Yeah, it's just one of those things. I mean, the projects are great, and I can't wait to share some images when I can do that. And then today I got a confirmation that a project I worked on a few months ago is, I guess, almost greenlit, which is really cool. But it's going to run the same time as this big one that's chewing up many hours for me. So it's one of those things where you just have to go, how do I find a bit more equilibrium? One of the things that is a great provider of that mental space is exercise, which is something I should do more of. But I've been training to go out to Colorado for some hiking in the last few weeks. Last time I went out there, I had a bit of an physiological altitude issue, and that really was a little scary, and it's a little nerve-wracking knowing I'm going out there and worrying that that's going to happen again. I trying not to worry, but so I've been, hiking, walking, running, doing everything I can to kind of get in as good of shape as I can to hopefully not have a problem. But that benefit effect of getting a little more headspace to think is great. And last week, my wife sort of asked, like, hey, so what's going on about getting an agent? I'm like, oh, work. That's all I kept saying. And she's like, I get it. But I told her, like, I'm hoping that being out and on vacation will give me that little bit of mental breathing room to look at my life and maybe write down the steps in order I need to take to get the agent hunt further than I have at this moment, because there's no easy, no perfect thing. So I just have to kind of grind it out and figure it out as I go along. This week's guest is Mike Maihack, and Mike is a killer cartoonist, comic book creator, writer. He's doing some very, very fun stuff. His work is a complete byproduct of his personality. He is just enthusiastic, and his work is this wonderful synthesis of his loves and his personality. He's the kind of person you want to have in your life. More people like him, more Mikes. We want more Mikes. He's just great. And I'm really fortunate to get the time to talk with him. So this is my talk with Mike Maihack. I like how you confessed your teenage love for Kitty Pryde today.
I don't even know if it's just teenage. It's just like a general, I've always been my favorite. Like, it's funny. I grew up for DC. I always liked Batgirl and Supergirl.
Right.
But I was a big X-Men fan. And then Kitty Pryde was my favorite X-Men. So I don't know where all that came from, but I just liked that she was the one that would always sort of speak her mind. And
yeah.
She had a cool power. I always thought she'd be a great spy. Like, she field and stuff, because she could disrupt electronics, and she was a good hacker, and she could just phase through anything. And I thought that, and plus her name was like Shadowcat, so it just sort of sounded like a very stealthy ninja type thing. So I always thought it'd be fun to write a comic like that, where like a little mini series where she got enlisted to help out, doing some spy thing. But make it like in Russia. So then you have the whole Colossus tie-in, and it's like this whole thing. And I think just because of me coming up with this story in my head, she became more of a favorite character, because then I had a reason to want to do something with her.
Yeah.
Which is usually the case for me.
It's funny. One of the great sort of side effects of having these conversations is reconnecting with these sort of points in my life. I'm like, oh yeah, I did that too. So like thinking about that, I'm like, oh yeah, like characters like Longshot, like I had all these stories in my mind after the series came out because I'm like, oh, I dig this character. There's so many cool things. And I think that's what always kind of drove me. I think like if I could put my feet in their shoes and kind of like come up with ideas for them beyond what was on the page,
right,
they were magic.
Yeah, exactly.
I was also thinking this morning about, I guess I don't know, it was this morning, but after you had made your post, and I was thinking about Kitty Pryde, and I was like, oh, you know what was really, I would love to ask Chris Claremont if it was his intention for her to have no identity because she was a teenager and she was always trying on like, I'm Ariel, I'm Shadowcat. Like,
I know, she never had a great name.
You know, it's like, wait, like nothing stuck. Like you're like, who are you? And is that the teenager like just saying, hey, I got a perm this week, or here's my new clothing, you know, like whatever the outfit was. And I'm like, oh, maybe that's what Chris's intention was. I don't know. I don't know if it was just fan support wasn't there. I mean, I loved Shadowcat. That was the coolest name.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things I sort of liked about her, though, is that she was sort of, I think as teenagers and as kids, we're always sort of adopting new identities based on who we're hanging out with and trying to figure out who we are, who we're going to be. Yep. And so I think that we really identify with that. I don't know if that was intentional on his part. I like to think it was, because I think that's really great, because she's still that character. She's still trying, even today, you know, she's trying to figure out who she is, and now she's going by Kate, and I'm always behind on what's going on currently, but yeah, I know she became like a captain and she was a pirate and all this stuff, and she's just still trying to figure out. I think she was like Star-Lord for a while. She took over for him, like out in space. Right.
Yeah.
So she's one of those characters that could be used in any situation, but then she always brings sort of her kind of, I don't know, spunky attitude towards it all, which gives it some sort of fresh feeling. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's why I've always liked her too. It's just because of that, because you could kind of switch her out depending on what situation would be fun to put her in.
No, totally. I think she is kind of this cool. I mean, I guess in some ways she's kind of a cipher for the reader, especially when she was a teenage character that the fan base could kind of identify, you know, and kind of experience being an X-Men through her.
Yeah. We all want to be mutants. There are all the mutants in the book are, you know, oh man, it's terrible being a mutant because like everybody hates us and stuff. Meanwhile, we're all like, I wish I was a mutant. I wish I went to Xavier school, you know. Yeah, I totally wanted to go to.
Oh Xavier. Yeah. I mean, it was. I remember being like 14, going like, wonder what would it be like maybe I am like, things are changing. I just don't like, maybe, and like you would just be hypersensitive to like wondering if you had this kind of thing happening to you, even though you deep down you knew there was no way for that to be a thing. But God, it was so cool. I you know, and it's funny, I read the X-Men, you know, I think from 1978, 79 all the way to like 1990-ish straight through. And I read the teen the New Mutants as well, but I don't remember a whole lot of rivalry between Kitty and the New Mutants. Like they're like, you know, I didn't get a whole lot of like them being angry that they're not on the A team, you know. Like,
I can't. She probably just didn't care and stuff.
So what was your on ramp like with creating things? Because like for me, there was some certain early hooks with comic books. I mean, I loved the Super Friends. Like that was the cartoon to wake up and watch on Saturday morning. But that might have been the easy delivery vehicle. But I remember getting my first 3 comic books. I still have them. Like they were they were pretty heavy, like impact, even though they weren't great. But like that was the thing, because cartoons, like I said, were only as good as like Space Ghost and the Super Friends. Like after that, it wasn't, you know, I mean, Bugs Bunny's awesome, but like I had no ever like thinking I would do that because somebody did that in the 50s. Like it didn't have any sort of daily relevance. What was your on ramp to making stuff?
It's funny. Well, it's funny you mentioned Bugs Bunny because like Looney Tunes, Merry Melodies and stuff was really probably one of my bigger influences. I was all the Chuck Jones shorts are just still to this day like just probably the most inspirational things in terms
brilliant.
Of how I approach timing and comedy and expressions and all that stuff. And but I think I was lucky. I feel like I was born in the right time where my trajectory is taking me on a good creative path. Where I was born like 1979, so my childhood was all through the 80s, and so I just got to watch 80s cartoons and grow up on 80s cartoons and comics and things like that. Which to me was like the golden age of Saturday morning cartoons. So we had all the and even into the 90s where I never really stopped watching them. But I grew up watching Transformers and He-Man and G.I. Joe and even like Rainbow Bright and stuff like that. Like anything that was animated, I was like pretty much into. More than sort of the only live action stuff I really got into too much was like I was really into Star Trek. My dad was a big Star Trek fan, so I watched a lot of that. Like he got me into the original series, and the Next Generation premiered somewhere in there in the 80s. There, I can't remember exactly when.
87.
But it was 87. Okay, and I remember watching he was so excited about it, and watching the very first episode, and I was just hooked.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, this is like what we were watching before, but like way better. That's what I thought when I was like, I guess about 8 years old. And I was like, oh my gosh, the ship looks so much cooler, and there's carpet on the ground. I don't know, but all of those things I think sort of inspired me to just want to kind of do things that were outside of what I would normally see every day. I love these sort of like imaginary sort of dreamscapes and different worlds and different styles. And so I just wanted to create them on my own. And so I would start just drawing and creating my own characters and creating my own worlds based on all of these things that I was reading and watching. And it just hasn't really stopped. I'm still kind of drawing and creating from all the things that sort of inspire me like day in and day out.
It is funny how compulsive the behavior, can be. There's this overwhelming urge to kind of make your own marks. You said you were making your own stuff. Because like for me, a lot of it had to do with taking the things that I loved and kind of modifying them for my own interest. And then it's a question of like how that tied in, because it was an interesting time, because like I was born a bit earlier than you, and my golden era of comics was like 79 through like 83, 84, like when like just what I felt was like all this amazing stuff was happening, Daredevil and Moon Knight and et cetera and so forth. And so I was so like tied into that stuff, and I was a little older, when the G.I. Joe cartoons and the, Transformers came out. And so I didn't, and the Turtles, like none of that stuff hooked me because I was a little bit older. So I think I was tied more into the mainstream superhero world, and I wanted to like be a part of that obsessively. And I had my little side stories, I'm like, well, these characters are here, and maybe I thought that they would one day be in the X-Men, that kind of thinking process. And I remember seeing my friends who had that indie comic vibe. They were like, here's my thing, and I'm doing my thing. I'm like, oh man, that's so cool. But I was so focused on going, to play with, the toys at Marvel or DC. Like my mind couldn't get out of that my own way. Were you like sit there and go like, this is my story and I can't wait to tell this story, and
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was a little bit of the opposite. I did have like this. My friends and I never really played Dungeons and Dragons, D&D or anything, but I played this Marvel Adventure role-playing game.
For sure, I remember that game.
But we never really played it. We were just roll the dice to create our characters, and we just love creating characters. And so we maybe sometimes do a little bit of a campaign, but for the most part, we were just creating characters. And I love to just draw those characters after the die had told me what it was going to be and what their powers were and all that stuff. But other than that, when it came to telling my own stories, I was much more just wanting to, I think with the superhero, like a lot of the superhero comics, and most of the last stuff I was reading was like in the 90s and stuff. So I had a very extreme style to it. And I almost felt like if I was going to do, and even when I drew superhero stuff, I had a very, I think, Liefeld or Jim Lee quality into them, because that's what I was, a lot of the books I was reading at the time were that. But I realized that wasn't a style I really gravitated towards naturally and wanting to draw like that. And I felt like if I was going to do superheroes, that was the way it was going to have to be. I couldn't really do, I was a lot into like newspaper funnies like Calvin Hobbes and Outland and Far Side and that type of thing. And I like to draw in that sort of style, sort of more of a comic book style. So as much as I loved reading superhero books, I didn't really want to draw my own superhero books. I wanted to do something else. I was also a big, like I said, science fiction fan. I was big into Lord of the Rings. I was really into fantasy and stuff like that. So it wasn't until Bone came along where I picked up like there was like this really early collection of the first 6 books that I found at a comic book store. And that changed my world, because then I realized it was sort of that comic strip quality, but more long, like what they were doing with like the longer form storytelling and sequential parts of the superhero stuff, with this big giant sort of Lord of the Rings sort of epic kind of thing, but still with humor and a lot of really excellent pacing, which I even at an early age I always responded to. I remember reading Doonesbury comics and not really understanding exactly what the payoff or the joke was, but I understood that's how the humor worked, and I would laugh at it just based on how the characters were sort of acting, and Bone did that so well. And so after that, then I just went on this really kind of passionate sort of path of wanting to make my own stories and create my own characters and tell stories that weren't necessarily superhero stories, but were probably very much influenced still by those sort of qualities that superheroes sort of embody.
Yeah. Well, I guess a lot of that black and white morality play that superhero convention sort of lives under, it can be applied in other aspects. You can have sort of that high drama aspect that goes on there.
Star Wars is all about that.
Yeah,
That's why Star Wars was as popular as it is because it was at a time where there was so much coming out that was just great. And then Star Wars comes like, oh no, these are the bad guys, these are the good guys, and then boom, here you go. And I think we long for that, we long to know this is the right thing to do. This is the wrong thing to do. And when you start sort of meshing it gets really stressful. And enough of that, I think folks will you'll feel that, and that's where a lot of psychological things kind of start happening. And so I think that's why superheroes have stayed around for so long, because they have that very sort of black and white morality towards them. And we want that. And then deep down, that's what everybody wants to be, good and a hero and stuff. But when we start graining that out, it makes life so complicated.
And I think, it's interesting because you were saying why people like Star Wars, and you think about, cinema in the 70s, it was very much a realism world, and it was very grim. There was a lot of, desaturated sensibility, and not everything was kind of on a minor key in many ways. And I think when something like Star Wars comes out, it really kind of redefines what people could see, and like Jaws, that came out a year before, and very much a Technicolor, high stakes, high energy, high focus type of film. And I think those things really kind of rejiggered everyone, at a point where they're like, hey, this is great. Like, because it's a relief valve from, this
for sure.
rigor, this post-Vietnam era, this post-Nixonian era. I mean, there's a whole lot of like, rhythms, and you can see that kind of come into play. And then you move into the 80s when things started getting a little brighter and a little like funner. And then, Frank Miller's like, well, fuck that. I'm going to make Batman the grimmest, darkest, most horrible thing ever. Enjoy, and then, Alan Moore. So I think these cycles kind of like the social cycle sort of directs how the consumer appeal comes into play. So like, I don't know what we're in. I mean, maybe we're in a grim period. So maybe some bright, fun, exciting things are necessary. And maybe that's the Marvel films, maybe the Marvel films are the panacea for this, I guess post-war on terror kind of life we're in, and et cetera and so forth. So, wow.
Yeah, the MCU is definitely, at least at the start, is definitely this generation's Star Wars, for without a doubt. It's the same. It's the same sort of mentality of like, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, and they still. I think the difference is because it comes from the Marvel world where there needs to be some sort of relatability to everybody, including the villains. There's always that what you want. There's always that draw towards wanting to understand why the villain's doing the thing that they're doing.
Yeah.
Like, why they're doing this terrible thing. And I think that'd be the biggest difference, because in Star Wars, I mean, the Empire is just bad. Yeah, there's no good thing that the Emperor is doing, at all. If there is something, you question it because there's like no way, rather with like Thanos, it's like, well, I could see where he's coming from, even if I don't agree with this or his methods. And so we try to put that into it. And I think that's very, relevant to the culture today. It's we want to try to, figure out everything, understand where everybody's coming from. At least I like to think that we're all trying to understand where everybody's coming from. I don't know if everybody really does.
I think more of us are than aren't. I think that's the nature of it. And it's, it is true because we're fascinated by crime, and we can go back into the 70s and we can look clearly at The Godfather, like that film, like in our obsession with, the gangster, and crime culture as a consumer nation, is because we want to go like, what is it in an individual when they wake up in the morning and say, time to do crime? Like, why is that the selection choice? And because it's not so much the emperor going, absolute power. It is somebody saying, hey, like, I've been backed into this corner and the only solution is X. And I need to do this because I have to save my family. Because if I do Y, which is the good thing, the steamrollers are just going to roll over our town and that's it. We're done. So I think I get that. And I think we are also probably more fascinated by the bad guy, and it makes writing heroes so much more of an interesting aspect, because you go, well, how do you make a hero compelling beyond just doing the right thing?
Yeah, there's always got to be some sort of I don't know. They can't. There has to be a reason why they're doing the right thing. Like something. Right. It's always something from their past or something. I think that's why. Why sometimes people find it hard to write or do things with like Superman or Captain America, who come from almost like this sort of mental, where they're every decision they do is just the perfect ethical correct solution. To everything. And I don't think it's that. Honestly, I think that's what makes their stories so interesting, is because nobody else does that. And just there's always something that we do wrong. And when they do something that feels outside of that, there's a story there, And so, and it doesn't have to be extreme. You don't have to turn Superman evil and stuff like that, but just making little quick mistakes and stuff. And
totally. And Captain America, like if Captain America, I think the other thing is that let's keep them on the good track. Let's keep Captain America doing the right thing all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But there's a trade-off to that. Like that doesn't make life easier. It makes life harder, you know? Yeah. And I think that that's a kind of the magic where you can kind of dive into these characters. And, you know, sure, we all love Wolverine because he can kind of do what he wants because that's what he does. And that's cool. But it's like, there's little sacrifice in action because you aren't holding something above something else, you know, and when you have to dig deeper into a character like Wolverine to find the thing that he is, you know, sort of sacrificing. He just doesn't maybe show that card, like Captain America's running around with that card strapped to his forearm, you know.
Yeah. I mean, not everybody wants what might be the right thing, you know. Yeah. So somebody that sort of goes against the grain, even if it is the right thing, is going to be persecuted for that, and some, you know, whether it's in small or big ways. And that's, I think those are what make heroes, is because they're going to do, even if it's sacrificial to what is going to benefit them, they're still going to go and they're going to do what needs to get done, what needs to be the right thing to do, even if, you know, means they're going to be attacked for it. And, you know, who doesn't aspire to be like that? You know?
Right, totally. and, you know, and it's funny because, you know, I grapple with that, you know, in my writing all the time, because I'm like, I have to keep my protagonist on this course, and her job is to keep her group on that same course. And what does it take for someone to stay as motivated and focused on these sort of compounding problems, you know, that crop up even as a result of their own good, true deeds, whatever they may be, and then getting to write the bad guys of the story and how their interactions are in their mind the true and absolutely right thing to do to make the world a better place, and how these conflicts, you know, kind of really have to lock in opposition to each other. It's a great challenge, and but it's funny. I think for me, I find it harder to write the protagonist in that respect, to not be as cookie cutter. Like the bad guys are way easier. You know, you're like, okay, well, this happened, so we hate that, and we're going to do everything we can to stop that to keep happening to us. And who cares who gets hurt in the process? You know, and you're like, okay, I can buy that. You know, like if I've been kicked long enough, I'm going to kick back. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting challenge. So looking at your work, which is totally cool. I pick up all these different vibes when I look at the work. I pick up on that, I guess, that really early Batman the Animated Series, like, like how like Bruce and the crew, you know, like especially when they drew like Robin and Batgirl, like I see so much of that vibe in there. Picking up a lot of the Studio Ghibli, you know, like that. Yeah. You know, like I can see some of that, really the sort of like that very like designed like head shape and like, you know, sort of like expressional shape, like all those kind of cool things. And I love the hybrid of that. Like, but it doesn't feel like either one of those things. Like I don't look at it and go like, because, you know, there's a lot of people who are like of the school of Tim, you know, and they have this very sort of Tim-esque, you know, look to the work, which is great, you know, but then you see people who look like that they are trying out for Ghibli, you know, on their work, and that's cool too. But it's like very cool how you've, you know, sort of infused all these elements, but kind of recontextualize them through your hand and eye. So, are there other ones that like you would sort of pull from your, you know, pantheon?
Oh man, there's so many. I'm always being sort of inspired by new things. it's like I'm just, keep pulling from other, artists and, and art and shows and movies, and just putting them into my reservoir of how I go approach my art, but still trying to keep it, something that I'm enjoying doing. There's sometimes where I'm so influenced by something, I try to draw something that's a little outside of my wheelhouse, and my style just sort of sneaks its way in there anyway, without any sort of even trying to force it out. It still kind of finds its way in. It's really cool that you recognize the animated series and the Ghibli stuff, because that's huge. I mean, those are two of my favorite things. I've seen every Ghibli thing. I've seen every single Batman. In fact, the only Batman comic I ever really bought was the Animated Adventures series, like the comic based on the cartoon. I have the full, like all of them. So I have like the entire set, just sitting in poly bags in the garage. Dude, in fact, I had to go and pull out the first appearance of Harley Quinn. So I was like, I shouldn't have that just sitting in the
garage.
Florida. So I finally got that. But I love animated stuff. I'm a big fan of like the early Disney cartoons, like the Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnson stuff that did like the early Robin Hood and Sword and Stone. That kind of really expressive acting that they would do in that style, that I really enjoyed seeing that. I grew up through the 90s, so a lot of that, those artists kind of found their way into my art.
Keane.
Yeah.
Because Glenn Keane was kind of like the animator of the 80s,
The reason I think Tangled looks as amazing as it does is because, and still holds up as a great CGI animated film, is because of his influence on it and stuff. Yeah. So the Little Mermaid, it's like those are even stuff like that I don't even recognize would be an influence or totally an influence, because they've been just embedded into my head. But even just now, this weekend I finished up reading the new, speaking of Keane, because you reminded me of Keane, but the Human Target series that came out.
Dude, I saw your post for that. And, I mean,
there it is. Yeah, those.
They're right here.
We're talking about there. And I mean, I didn't just read those books. I was just studying those books.
Yeah.
Every single panel, it's just like, how did he approach this color here and this angle and this hand, and then the way that the characters would sort of move. That's going to find itself, because I was studying so much. It's not going to look like small. There's no way it's going to look like that. It's not going to be that good. But a lot of the things that I saw that I really really find myself pulled to, I think is going to find itself into my art from for a little while, because I'm so influenced by it right now, and maybe those styles or whatever. Who knows what's going to be? I haven't even.
I think that's
really drawn anything since I finished it, but it's there's just a lot, and even Jack Kirby, I think, is a huge, a giant influence. I'm working on actually, I probably can't say exactly who's in it. I just was told I'm not, but it is another I can't say it's another Spider-Man book.
Okay.
And it takes place in space, and so I'm drawing upon. This is not Jack Kirby, but I have this in front of me.
Okay, sure, yeah.
And so I'm just looking at all this old Perez art and the way that he would approach the cosmos, and the way that all these sort of little styles, and then which gets me going, looking on the way Jack Kirby would approach things and how similar they were. And you can see how much Kirby's influence was on Perez, and then this and this and this and this. And I think that's how we look at, you have this, like, you have Bruce Timm influence, but like really it's kind of a Darwin Cook influence, because he's influenced by that. And it's just compounding influences. And so enough of that, and being I kind of love all things. There's not really anything. It's hard for me not to like something. I always come away with something that I like. And so all that just kind of falls into really just trying to make my art appealing, and something that conveys the information in a way that's really kind of easy for people to kind of see right away. I guess that's what I kind of go for.
That's cool. Yeah. I mean, Perez's work on Infinity Gauntlet is amazing. And the idea of like what you said there is so kind of interesting, because like, I don't think people would naturally look at his work and go, Kirby. But the point being is I would find it impossible for George Perez to not have been influenced by Jack Kirby.
Right.
Because of timing, like I think about the tree of influence in comic books so much. Like, where do these lines come, and who is like the progenitor of these things? So you would think like Toth. Well, Toth influenced this person, who influenced this person, who influenced, and you can see how that tree just kind of grows out. And you can see how with the Kirby thing, and then you look at it now, like it's really fascinating that Toth's influence is far more visible in current day comic book creation than Jack Kirby's on a visual aspect, because people stopped emulating Kirby's look at any degree, except for maybe that cool squiggle to show a reflection. It all kind of dissipated, and Kirby crackles. Never lose the Kirby crackle.
Yeah, the crackles, yeah.
But like his greatest influence, longstanding, is Bruce Timm's influence on everybody else.
Yeah. Who look his I mean, if I had to name, I've never talked to Bruce Timm, but if I asked who his biggest influence was, it was Jack Kirby. You look at that, just you put them side by side, you're like, oh yeah, totally. I remember with Bone, I was I used to work as a telemarketer in Ohio for when I was in college, and there's a lot of just sitting on the phone and like kind of I would draw and read as I was just like dialing numbers and people are answering. And so at one point I brought in I had all the floppies of Bone, and I would bring them all in, and I got the entire office sort of reading Bone comics. And there was somebody, somehow I reached like the back, what wasn't even one of the people that called people, somebody else that worked in the building. And he goes, what is this? You know, one of the issues had gotten back to him, and he's like, this is Pogo. This is just like Pogo, you know? And I was like, what's Pogo? I didn't even know what Pogo was. Yeah. So to me, I'm going to be influenced by, Jeff Smith's artwork and his styles and stuff like that. Meanwhile, somebody that knows Pogo is going to see, oh, that's Pogo. We're clearly, after looking at it, I was like, oh, you're so influenced by this, obviously. But I didn't know what that is. And so you talk about that tree of influence. We don't even know how far sometimes we're going down the roots, because we're just not even maybe familiar with those early influences are to the artists that really inspire us.
For sure.
I'm sure there's tons of people that look at Bruce Timm and just think that's where it started.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I always see Jack Kirby's art. Every time I look at a Bruce Timm drawing, I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. It's a very, very stylized, very softer, more sort of organic kind of looking.
Dude, long time ago, I was in San Diego, and me and my buddy linked up with those guys, with Bruce, Ronnie Del Carmen, Glenn Murakami, and and we ended up.
Hey man, that sits right there too.
Oh yeah, dude,
right on my desk.
It's so good. And we ended up stealing all the notepads in the hotel and running up to somebody's room. I have no idea whose room it was. And we sat there, and we would just. This is what they would do, I guess, on their hangouts, and they would you'd name a character, and then you get like a minute to draw it. And then everyone throws the drawing onto the bed, and then you get to grab which one you think is cool, And but I mean, sitting there with every single one that Bruce put out was just brilliant after brilliant, and we're just like, good God.
Yeah, he knew exactly just the right line in the right spot, just to exactly, showing just what you need to convey the information. And that's what's so impressive. When I look at artists these days, that's where I always feel like I get too lost in the details sometimes. And I always want to, kind of fall back a little bit and just try to keep expressiveness of the characters. I think of artists that do that today very, very well. Chris Schweizer comes to mind. I think he's a master at it. Chris Samney does an incredible job. His use of shadows is impeccable, and just where he can put that in. And so it might not be something where I want to be like that style, but I look at how they're approaching things, and I try to look in trying to approach my work, even if it's different, sort of the same sort of ideas and stuff. Is it so important that say like a finger has all three little nooks and crannies to it and stuff, or does it? Do I need that, or would it look better? Where not look better, but more like would the information be conveyed more clearly? If I made that a little bit more expressive. And so I'm always trying to loosen up and I'm always trying to improve. I always just want to try to. Well, I get bored staying in one, doing the same thing over and over.
Same lane. Yeah.
I just want to try to do new stuff. Yeah.
And I think that, it's interesting because, the perspective of being the 20-something-year-old artist and not the 20-something-year-old artist, you think about I think, when an artist stops trying to chase something that is just out of reach is when that stagnation happens, when you can see it in the art. You go, oh, it's not what it used to be, you as the viewer of the art. And it's always a little heartbreaking because you have so much emotional, connection to what they produced previously. So when you see it, you're like, you give them the benefit of the doubt for many, many, many projects. But then it's eventually you're like, oh, come on. Like, I just want to see the next thing that it's going to make me go, whoa.
Yeah. And I think it's hard for artists because we know that, I mean, we know that our readership or our fan base or whatever is always looking for like, what's going to be the thing. You never know. I never know what's going to hit with people. There's some of my favorite drawings I feel personally that I've ever done have never, just won't land, know, and I'm going, oh man, I love this one, but who knows what people are going to respond to. So I think as artists too, we're always sort of, we're always trying to improve on that level too. Like try to outdo ourselves, outdo what we've done before. I don't think you can ever enjoy your own work to a level that other people do. And nobody's going to see. You're not going to be able to see what other people see. And
you can't experience it on a level of looking at it and going like, oh, that's so cool. You can look at it and go, well, I guess the figure's good. The gesture's nice.
Right,
right? And you're like, but that foot doesn't feel like it's landing in the right. Yeah, like you start to like picking out all this.
You start really nitpicking it, and it's tough. And I think that's where kind of the struggle lies. Is you sort of have to again just see you can't get so bogged down on the details that you sort of lose a drawing soul.
Right?
Yeah, kind of. I was talking to a friend years ago. I was like, to me, a drawing feels done when it kind of smells right. Like there's something about the illustration. This is when I was doing a little bit more, less pinups and more illustration stuffs. But like, if I'm going to draw an ocean, I want to smell that ocean. If I'm going to draw the sky, I want to. There's that salt in the air or something like that.
Yeah.
And even though you can't smell it, it's got to feel. It doesn't have to look correct. It just has to feel correct. And so that's how I was trying to convey that through that some way that you would never be able to smell a drawing. Well, that would be fun.
Sure, right. and who doesn't want that scratch and sniff on everything?
Yeah,
it's what you don't want a production problem with scratch and sniff.
Yeah, like all the smells start combining together. That was always the thing with scratch and sniff is like it would. at first it might smell like the thing, but then after a while, all the smells just, and it just became like the scratch and sniff smell, like its own unique sort of flavor.
Totally. We it's funny. It's funny because I think that because you have to chase. I think it comes down to what you mentioned earlier in this idea of that feeling thing, and I think it comes down to what we were saying, like with Tim, how he created these shorthand methods and in mark creation that tells all the information that you need to know of value, which is very, animator based, but Kirby did as well. Like they created this system of this is how this is it. This is what this is. It didn't matter specifically what the tech did. It was Kirby tech, and it was impressive. Like, well, there's a lot of stuff in there, so this machine must be powerful.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Yeah, sure, this can go into different dimensions because it's got all the stuff on it. And I think that's like, as an artist, the heart, like, because you were talking about detail, and that was always like, for me, was my Achilles heel as an artist, is that all I wanted to do was add more like detail. Like, how detailed can I make this outfit? Can I make it like really seem, and not being like a realist, but just being like accurate and proper with all, like, hey, I need to make sure there's dimension on this belt, because otherwise it's just a line. It needs to have some weight around it. But that is sort of is antithetical to the concept of the feel thing, because the feel thing is, it doesn't have to have that. Like, it's just thinner line at the top, thicker line at the bottom. There's your belt. And it's just, and it's like, okay, you've added weight, you're telling the story, and it feels like the thing. And I think, like Darwin elevated that style, that Timian, I call Timian style, to that more realistic sensibility of feel in his work. You're like, oh yeah, this is a gritty world. It's like, very cool.
Yeah, it's so true. Just like going back to like Smallwood's work and the Human Target. I mean, he did these really, I wouldn't say hyper realistic, but in terms of what we were used to, especially compared to Bruce Timm, more realistic drawings and shading. But all his color is flat color.
Totally.
Yeah, and so he's using his rendering in that line. Where some people would sort of do the opposite. They would try to put those details, which I do, a little bit with my color and work and stuff. And so he would do those angled, lighting.
Yep.
Which I love. It's just God, beautiful. And so that's just another, you look at it, you go, man, it's so detailed. So, but that was another simplified approach to the way he was approaching the artwork. Just like you're saying with the belt, he didn't need to put all the little sort of gradients and shading for what the skin would be. It was just a shade, and then the line work and this sort of low soft shading for that kind of did the work itself. So everybody has a different way of going about that. I think everybody has their little shortcuts and their little things that, but I don't think viewers, readers, they always notice those things. And I think, especially with comics, if they're doing a good enough job, they shouldn't notice those things because they're too invested in the story. And so that's what needs to be seen. That needs to be told. And I think it's even more these days where the competition is getting more and more fierce with comics, and you have to produce these comics more quickly, and get them out. And especially just to make a paycheck. You have to find those ways. You can't put all that detail in it if it's not needed, because you would never get the book done. It would take forever. No. And everybody works at different speeds. Everybody is able to do different things. But yeah, I mean, I think finding those little shorthands is what makes each artist sort of unique. And I love finding those shorthands. I think that's, it's just it's so neat to see the approach that a lot of artists do.
Oh yeah. And so you said like you met, this tying it, into what you said earlier about this is that you are always trying to find a way to clarify or simplify the thing. Do you have any sort of like ways that you go about doing that? Like, one of the things I would do is I would take a piece of, vellum or tracing paper and lay it over a drawing of mine. and I would try to edit it down, go like, okay, what do I need and what do I don't need here? And to try to sort of simplify the sort of the thought process, like what was the thing that really works and doesn't need to work. And not that I did that for everything, believe me. But it was a model to try to figure out how to kind of understand.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. And I think I do something similar. I mean, a lot of the artwork I do is digital. Even the traditional artwork I do usually starts out digital. I'll do my pencils and rough that way because I can easier block out an idea. I usually work with a very scribbly, rough sort of shape of what I want the image to be. Or if I'm looking at a character, just kind of get a general idea of what it is. But then I go over that and I just sort of simplify all these lines and stuff as much as I can. Same as putting like a piece of tracing paper over it. It's just another layer that went on top of it. In fact, I don't even really pencil my work anymore. That was one way I try to get back to. I used to, even working digital with Cleopatra in space, I would do sort of my rough layouts, which were pretty tight. My roughs were tight, and then I would do like sort of the pencils, and then I would just go in and do sort of the inks, even though it was still just digital. And I would find that I would lose a lot of what was working in those initial roughs. Just in terms of maybe an expression or a movement, it just would start becoming more and more rigid, and I just wasn't enjoying the process very much. I wasn't enjoying the artwork as much, and so I wouldn't say it feels recent, but like it's been probably about good 3 or 4 years now. I've started to just do it with pencils completely, and I start with this very scratchy rough. And I just go in there and pretty much my inks are my pencils.
Yeah.
And that was one way I kind of went about sort of simplifying that work. If things didn't really line up correctly, that's fine because I think it gives some depth and stuff to the drawing and gives some, a little bit more fun to it, a little bit more whimsy. And, funny enough, I think that's where my work started to take off a little, even just the past 3 years, where people started to respond to it a little bit more. And maybe it's because of that, because they could see a little bit more of the joy that was coming out through it, rather than just trying this rigorous, trying to get things right.
Accuracy.
And that people respond to.
Yeah. And I think that's a really common thing. Like I would, if I could say, if I could pick one word to describe my comic book art, would be overworked. I think I just overworked everything. Like my underdrawing was more than needed. My pencils were more than needed. I did, and I would do full pencils before I inked things if I had to ink stuff. I'm like, why was I doing that? Why was I making myself work so hard? And I think by taking that underdrawing as your foundation, like if you figure that part out and you can live with that, everything that's going to go on top of that is going to at least be in the right neighborhood.
Right. Yeah. And so that's kind of, how I go about things now. And I think it's if anybody listening right now has never tried it, I think if they feel like it's just losing something, I would recommend always, sort of loosening up. And that's a good way to, without feeling like you have to have that very first sort of, those marks on paper be correct, just get the feeling out, get the idea out. I don't even focus on anatomy that much. I just kind of keep it in the back of my head. I mostly want to just have a feeling that I'm trying to convey with that character, and or even if it's a background or something. Yeah. And then I just, really, then you just hope for the best after that. It doesn't always work. Then you're sitting there struggling like this. I really should have put a little bit more time into this underlying drawing.
But that's got to be, there is the reason why I didn't do it, is I was afraid that I would end up messing things up, it was this control issue of it was like the idea of like when you hear somebody, someone you respect say, well, I use a brush because I have more control. And and then the novice mind goes, are you kidding? A felt tip pen has more control than a brush because it doesn't get out of control. But you're missing the idea that the control is being able to change what that line is versus the inflexible line. And I think that's the same thing about what with the artwork, is that this fallacy of, if I take the training wheels off, I'm just going to crash. And
Right.
yeah, you're going to crash, but eventually you'll get past that point of self-destruction and move into that space of, oh, well, I got this, I can do this, and
Yeah.
see that next, and be able to kind of like play chess with your own art, your own creation. I don't even mean it has to be artwork. We can talk about writing. We can talk about anything in this respect, is that you can sort of see what the goal is before you have to put the commitment down somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Writing for sure is the same way. I mean, I think, I think most writers rarely use anything that's in their first draft. It's just trying to get there might be little bits and pieces, but you're just trying to get the idea, that feeling
structure.
out. Yeah,
It's the idea and the structure that you get.
Maybe a pacing, whatever, but you're just trying to get the idea down, and then you kind of use that sort of, again, like your underlying drawing, just go back over that and just kind of start either dismantling it or building on top of it. A little combination, I think, of both those things. And I think it's different, with digital art. I think it's a little different than with traditional art. Like, I'm sure what you were talking about, like wanting to, having to take the training, which was a great metaphor, taking the training wheels off and stuff, and not wanting to make sure, make sure you're not going to mess it up. But with traditional art, you couldn't. Once the ink is down with the brush, you're done. But with digital, you can kind of delete a line or change
Forever.
it, or and there's that gives you a little bit more confidence, because knowing that no matter what sort of thing you're going to put down on that screen or Cintiq or iPad or whatever, the fact that you can change it. It's funny how often you don't, because it's just having that confidence that knowing it's fine. And, but it is hard to bring that to, I think, sort of that mental state of, no, this is permanent. This is it.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're hitting the nail completely on the head in this respect. I mean, you're very politely telling me, saying I'm old in this conversation, but that's okay. But when it comes to that, like, because, I guess I've been working directly into computer for the last 23-ish years. And it's funny, every time I've had to go back and do something by hand, that automatic, Command Z thing pops in your head, and you're like, don't get that option anymore. And, but that fear of permanency, in a traditional sense is, it's a tough one to kind of overcome with sort of reckless creative abandon, like,
I can be kind of a perfectionist. And one of the things I've worked at over the past few years is trying to kind of do away with a lot of that perfectionism, especially in my art. And but one of the reasons I started working with watercolors is because they have such a mind of their own. You really have to kind of let them do their own thing. So having to relinquish some of that control was almost freeing. And it's relaxing to me to sit there with watercolors, even though I'm easily mess them up all the time. Could mess them up, do mess them up. But the fact that once it's down there, that's it. There's something, I don't know, something cathartic about that.
Yeah.
And you're not going to sit there and sort of tinker and finesse and sort of take those wonderful little accidents away from your work. There's a lot of pros and cons to both. I think that's why I like working as a mixture of both, doing both traditional and digital and combining those two elements, because I don't think I like one really over the other. I just like a lot of aspects of each. And it's made drawing a lot more fun for me, for sure.
And there are a few things that look as cool as like comic artwork with watercoloring, because I think, here's what it is for me. And I just realized it's Bill Watterson. It's getting to see Bill Watterson. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, it's that thing. It's the black, it's that cool black line with that watercoloring. There's the magic.
It really looks sharp. I was a big, in college, I got really into David Mack stuff, and did kabuki and stuff. And what I loved was his just sort of splashes of color that he would put on the page. And I realized when I was trying to do something similar, how that did not, it looks great for him.
Sure.
When I try to do it with sort of my style, it was always something missing, wasn't working until I just sort of fell into doing my own way of splashing colors. And I think that's what watercolor is about. It's like, it's not, you can't really mimic somebody else the way somebody does watercolor, because the way it comes to, it's just water, it's just it's gonna fill however much you put on your brush, however you hold a brush, what kind of colors you're using. It's going to be different for everybody. And I think part of the fun is finding like, well, what works for me? What am I good at?
Right.
And
it's like, well, watercolors.
I'm still trying to learn. I'm still trying to.
Well, yeah, because it's. I mean, like, I think because like you're naming them, the variables are the paper, the volume of the water, the hardness of the water, the load that you put onto that brush of whatever color it is. All those factors, the air quality, all this stuff.
Air quality. The type of water.
Right. It all comes into play without you involved. Like all that stuff actually matters. And so like the watercolorist is like, a lot of the job is knowing when to stop. Like that's like, okay.
That's key. Yeah, that's it right there. Because it's so easy to just kind of keep, I don't know, should I do this? There's a lot of, most of my time watercoloring is just staring at the thing going and trying to envision if I take this little color and I do this with it, is it going to make it better? Is it going to make it worse? And sometimes it does make it worse. You're like, I shouldn't have done that. Or,
no, it's olive drab.
Yeah. Or you're impatient. You don't want the water to dry when you should let the water dry. Again, I think that's what makes it fun. Art should be experimental in a lot of ways, it should be trying new things and seeing what works and failing,
Totally.
Otherwise, you're never going to figure out how they grow, how things are going to work. And so, I'll probably always be working in watercolors, even if they do take me a lot longer to sit there.
They're humbling. It's the most humbling. Of all the mediums, watercoloring is the most humbling.
Yeah.
Even if you do a good one, the next one could just blow up on you.
Right.
And it's great. And, listen, and I think that's the best advice in the world is it's okay. Like fail. Just go out, just do it because, and the thing is that like, because we live in a sort of culture of, looking cool and being perfect or whatever, because that's what we're trying to put out there in this little, social world of ours. But the thing about to do great art is that you have to also embrace that failure. And like you said, with the writing, you can't write anything until you write something bad and then you can fix it. And, like the underdrawing is where you get a chance to be bad. Like make the mistakes, figure those things out, and then go at it. And get a new piece of paper, try it again.
Yeah. The important thing is just creating the thing, whether it's good, whether it's bad. The fact that you sat there and you made something, that's the important stuff. I think starting is usually the hardest thing for a lot of folks, is because we want, again, like you said, we want things to be perfect right off the bat. We want right out of the gate, we want it to be good. And so we kind of hold back because we don't know how to do that, because we shouldn't know how to do that. The idea is to put something out there bad. And I have a Patreon that I use to post pretty much everything I do, all my art. But one of my favorite things I like to use it for is I post all of my underlying drawings, the really scribbly stuff that I wouldn't share anywhere else, and the time lapses of me like just trying to figure out how to draw like a hand or even Superman's S or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I love sharing that because I like folks to see that, even though I'm, I might be have a career in comics and I'm cartooning all day, I'm still making mistakes 24/7. I'm still trying to work through them, still trying to figure things out. But to me, that's what makes drawing so much fun. It's just this big puzzle that you're trying to solve, and you're just trying to capture what's in your head, trying to put it out there for other people to see. It's never going to come out like you want it, and so it's always a big kind of like almost this big surprise, this present. And like, oh, this is this. It's not what I wanted, but there it is, and it's just really, I'm happy to share it, share it with people.
Well, I think that, I mean, and that sense of abandon or a bravado in that sense, and it's not a flex. It's the opposite. It's an opening up to the process, the humanist side of your art. And, it's not easy, and it's certainly not easy. Like, think about like what is rewarded and what's not rewarded in general. That's typically not rewarded in the mainstream of life. So it's great. And I'm sure that the people who are engaged with that are super excited about it, because it's a sense of truth and something they can go like, yeah, I can identify with that. Like I struggle with the thing I want to do.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I know when I see other artists, struggling with something I also struggle with, I find that validating.
Sure.
It's like, oh, I'm not the only one, that has trouble figuring that type of thing out. And we all. I think it's good to know that everybody's messing up all the time. Yeah.
So this leads me to the thought of, what was it, and how did you, like, what was it that made you say, I'm going to go do this thing, whatever it is? And when did you say, like, I'm going to pursue doing what you're doing? Like, were you a teenager? Were you in your 20s? Like, what was it? Because it's terrifying to open yourself up to this greater audience, especially on the professional aspect of saying, I want to do this, and knowing the probability of the, like, you're not good enough, kid, is going to come back at you. Like, what was it for you, and when was that?
Oh, well, I was definitely young. I was probably, I think, going back to, discovering that 6-book trade paperback of Bone. So that was probably, really early, like, I'm going to say 91, 92. I'm trying to think about when that was, around that time where I discovered that was it. I mean, I was going to make my own, I was going to self-publish my own comics. I was going to make my own stories. I used to tell these little stories and, share them with my friends at school. We'd work together on stories in the cafeteria during lunch. And I went to art college primarily with the idea that I want to make comics when I'm out of college. We didn't have sequential art degrees then. I think there was maybe 1 or 2 colleges that might have them, but I went for an animation degree because I thought maybe that would be a good sort of stepping stone into the sequential world, like learning how to, draw characters as sequence and create characters and stuff like that, and learn life drawing and all that. So I did illustration and animation, but my idea was always I wanted to tell my own stories. I didn't know what those stories were going to be. I knew I was always making up characters. They were influenced by a lot of different things. One of the first comics I put out was like sort of this very, I don't want to say like a replicant of what Bone was, but it was 2 characters that got lost in the valley, because that's what I knew. I was like, I'm going to do this, something kind of similar. And it was, this kind of fantasy type story. But it was just kind of making things up and seeing, throwing against the wall and seeing what sticks and what people want to go up to the wall and take a better look at. And once that happened, I just sort of ran with a lot of the ideas. I think Cow and Buffalo was one of the first ones that really stuck with people. It was this influenced more by I think Monty Python humor, kind of mixing that, but with like Charlie Brown and Snoopy, sort of that sort of pathos.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a weird mix. But that was like this little strip style comic that I did for about 6 years. And then in the while I was doing that, I wanted to kind of just get better at what I was doing in terms of storytelling and art. And that's where I started drawing a lot more fan art of superheroes. The Batgirl Supergirl comics kind of came out around that time.
Okay.
Which were essentially Count Buffalo comics, just with Batgirl and Supergirl. At first, they've kind of evolved past that, but at the beginning, it's pretty much what they were. And then Cleopatra in Space was sort of created in there.
And when was that?
That was around 2000. Gosh, I don't know, 2009 maybe. I created the character somewhere around that time. And I started putting that up online. The nice thing about growing up when I did and getting into comics when I did is that we had webcomics as an option. It wasn't like I want to make comics, but then I have to go seek out a publisher or look up printing costs, and which at first I thought that would be a big roadblock for me, trying to figure out all those technical stuff I wouldn't have wanted to do at all, and all that sort of that aspect, the business kind of technical side of it. But when you could just draw the comic, scan it, put it online, it was really easy to kind of just publish a comic. And then once you had enough there and you felt you had an audience, and you could kind of make your real life books. So once it was just sort of that evolution of coming up with ideas and stories and seeing what worked. And Cleopatra in Space, I think, was one of the first ones that really, I mean, Cow Buffalo did well, but Cleopatra really took on a life of its own outside of even what I thought it was going to be. And that's sort of what kickstarted my career. Was just, there wasn't any one thing. It was just like a steady pursuit of wanting to make comics and wanting to come up with ideas. And I went through a lot of different ideas. And that's, these are the ones that people know are the ones that just kind of ended up sticking around.
Totally. I mean, it's the 15-year overnight success. That's just
Yeah. I mean, I didn't professionally pursue comics until I was out of college. They were more of just a fun thing that I knew I was going to do. But everything I was drawing was working towards that eventual goal, that would be my career. I always knew, I think ever since my mom threw the Sunday Funnies in front of me, I think I was probably 5 or 6 years old, I would sit there and I would just copy Calvin Hobbes cartoons, just redraw them. And Opus, I loved Opus. So he was so fun to draw with his giant nose. And ever since then, that's all I've ever wanted to do was comics. Ever since I was like 5 or 6 years old. And so
there's your connection to Bone. Opus's nose.
Oh my gosh, So, but yeah, and then I feel really blessed. I feel really thankful that I was actually able to happen. I realized my story is not a unique one. I think there's a lot of people.
No, I mean, I think it's
do the same thing and just haven't really found that thing that has stuck against the wall just yet.
Right.
But I'm always trying to outdo myself. I'm always trying to get better, look at what I could be improving on, and then thinking also in terms of what needs to be out there. What would make people, what does the world need right now? What would make people happy? What would entertain them? What would entertain me that I don't see that's out there right now?
That's the big one.
That's always a tough one, because that's a risk.
You will do it. That's the thing. You'll do the thing that you want to do over and over again, while the thing you think, because I mean, if you're like, oh, I think people want this, you may not be enthusiastic about it. Or you may not be able to maintain the enthusiasm for it, because I think we can always kind of gin up a bit of enthusiasm on on something, this will be awesome.
We'll find a way to get excited about it. But the thing is comics really, comics really, you're not going to make a lot of money, just straight up. You're not going to make a lot. There's a few select where people can make it work, but you're not going to make a whole lot of money doing comics. So it makes no sense to go and draw something if you don't want to draw it, when you're not even going to make a lot of money doing it anyways. It just logically draw the thing that you're going to be passionate about, what you want to do, because it's probably not going to make any money anyways, So it's one of those things where it's, and people are going to respond to that. They're going to know if you're not into the thing that you're drawing. They're going to see it. It's going to come out in your art. It's going to come out in the soul of that drawing. And so, yeah, I think it's really really important that unless you're having fun with it, there's no reason to pursue it as a career.
Listen, we all have to eat, so do what you have to do to eat. But the thing is, when it comes to doing the things, find the things that inspire you, because that's what's going to translate. Absolutely.
Make sure you're having fun, for sure.
So like for you with writing, the model is with people who draw and write, they write by drawing, and and then script around that, and which is sort of the natural progression. Do you script now? Like, do you write things out? Like,
I do. My approach varies between, like, from project to project, or story to story, just whatever the story is trying to be. When I was doing the Cleopatra in Space webcomic, I was just kind of drawing it as I went at first, just kind of making it page by page and just drawing and writing right on the page as I was drawing it. When it came time to do a graphic novel and I was working with an editor, I was like, well, this isn't gonna fly. This isn't gonna work, because the editor needs to know what the story is gonna be.
Totally.
So we can take care of any issues before I really get into the nuts and bolts of drawing it. And so I started working off of, I wouldn't say they would be traditional style comic scripts. They were almost just the way I would write a script, which was mostly, like, it would almost be like a playwright without using the actual structure of a playwright. But I would, but it was mostly dialogue. I would write a lot of dialogue, and I would sort of kind of plot around how my characters were interacting and where I could create those beats of action and humor. And it was almost like kind of crafting a song in a lot of ways, and what that rhythm of the story was going to be. And so I got to the point where around book 3, I had these really tight scripts, because I was really, I could visualize it so well in my head when I was writing down the page exactly how it was going to be drawn, that I could easily just write and I would just pretty much almost adhere to those scripts for the whole latter part of the Cleopatra and Space books. But after that, like, just now, for like the last Spider-Man book, I wrote a whole script out, sort of similar for this last Spider-Man book I'm working on. And then as I started drawing, I just kept changing it and on the page as I was drawing it. And so I had used the script almost as just sort of rough idea of what the general A to B to C, was going to be. And sort of little dialogue points and things like that. And then I would just kind of created its own thing in the comic format. And so it really changed. Now I'm doing it. So it's a very writing a script and then working on the page and using the script, kind of doing a lot of this. It just back and forth. The next project could be a really tight script. I just adhere to it. The other one could be no script at all. It just depends. I don't really have a method anymore.
It makes sense. It's appropriate. It's appropriate. Like, I don't think anything should be like, there shouldn't be some sort of rigorous rule about things, except for be cool to one another.
Yes, for each other.
Yeah, but like, we don't, like, you should be able to, like, anything and everything can work, or it doesn't work. It doesn't matter. Like, whatever gets the project done and the way that makes you say, I am comfortable and happy with sharing this with the world, then that's the thing. And that's cool. Like, let the model evolve, change, whatever, who cares?
Yeah, it just sort of depends. And it's different for me because I know I'm going to be drawing my own stories, so I don't have to have, I know I can change things in the script, and it doesn't have to be rigid. And I think it'd be different, if I was writing for another artist, I'd have to be a little bit, more specific. I don't know how that would work. I think if I was ever to write for another artist, I'd want it to be very collaborative.
Right.
A lot of back and forth. But I don't know. It just depends. Again, it always depends, I think, on the story and what it needs and how it evolves as you approach it.
Mm-hmm.
The first Spider-Man book stayed pretty close to the script I wrote for it. And again, this third one has just kind of evolved into its own fun, wacky thing. So, yeah. And then I'm working on another book simultaneously with these where I'm just, I almost wrote like a novel, and I wrote it out as a sort of like this sort of novella kind of story, and then try to work out a comic around that. And it's just again a lot of back and forth going,
so like a heavy treatment, and then you convert that into story.
Yeah.
Well, so okay, couple things from that. One is your editor must be a saint for you completely changing, the actual submitted script. So that's pretty impressive to have so much evolution. We'll make it a polite term, call it evolution, in the midst of the actual art process. Was that a challenging first phone call with like, hey?
I think having, at least in terms of the Spider-Man books, how close and we created a really pretty good working relationship between that one. So I knew sort of what she was expecting from me and what, how I was going to approach, kind of the story. And
right.
So the second book was sort of this in between where I came up with this crazy idea in the middle of the story, and I'm going to change things. Okay. And I think there was just this confidence, like, look, if you think it's, going to work, try it out, see how it is. And if it doesn't, we'll tell you, there's always, So there was always that sort of fear that, they could come back and go, look, no, this is why did you change this so completely? But in the back of my head, I can hear her voice telling me things as I'm changing things too.
Right.
Like, I can go, I can see where she's going to go, where she'd want me to go here. Or things I can already see myself fighting on later.
Is this worth it?
So it happens in every book,
Yeah.
I think it helps to have. I don't think any creator could work with an editor that they can't trust, and vice versa. You have to have that working relationship where there's a reason you guys are working together. And so you can't trust your editor's input on something and they can't trust your creativity on something. I don't think it's going to work. And I've just been very fortunate to have editors. I've had 3 editors now, and they've all just had different approaches, different ways of relaying feedback. And I'm just growing with each one. I'm just learning from each one.
Well, there's a lot of publishing, houses and editorial. They have to answer to people in the process as well, and so a lot of houses will they demand that full, tight script, and that's what's going to go up the food chain and get approved. And when it's approved, we're in. And so making those changes becomes problematic on a structural level, internally, not on the page.
And it is. I mean, there is a little bit of that, especially with Spider-Man being a Marvel book. There are certain, things we have to adhere to in terms of like Marvel and what you can and cannot do, and but you can. The nice thing is when I start working on my rough draft, the actual illustrative rough draft of the book, not the script. My roughs are pretty tight. They're pretty much my really rough pencils. And so you can read the whole book, easily understand everything about it. But it's drawn quickly and fast enough that if I have to make changes, it's not that big a deal.
Cool.
It's very easy for me to go back because before I go in and really fine tuning it, and I think it's important to work that way too. To me,
I love that.
You have to be able to you can't become too married, especially when with working with a publisher. You really can't become too married to the work that you're doing, because things will have to change. But I found just in the 10 years I've been doing this, things 99% of the time, 99% they change for the better. They're really, you sit there, you sit there, they might even give you a suggestion. You go, no, I will not change that. And then you sit there and you come up with an even better idea, So, I don't know. I've probably just been lucky, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, or maybe you're actually really good to work with, that could be another thing, and the other thing, and you sort of touched on it, but I'm going to bring it back is, you're drawing all these things that you're writing. I absolutely recommend you writing for somebody else if you can.
Oh, I mean, if thanks, that's really nice to hear. I would love to. I think it'd be a fun. I would look at it as a fun challenge, is how I would sort of look at it. Something, if I came up with a story and I go, I love this story, not in my style, I wouldn't want to draw it. And then who would be a good collaborator for that story?
Right.
But thanks. And then, I'd love somebody to come and ask me to do a Supergirl or a Batgirl, even a short story. I would write one, even if I didn't have time to draw one. But
it's, the thing is that it is a, the magic happens when you envision the story in your head and you have to tell this story to somebody else who is then going to tell that story to everybody.
Yeah.
And as a writer, that job becomes far more critical in that what you're putting on that page, as in the word form, becomes so much more critical. And you begin to really envision the story in a different way when you are trying to communicate that to somebody else, not just yourself or an editor.
That's a good point. Yeah. And I like that too, because it's creating, it's making you think differently, making you create differently. And all of that just adds to better future storytelling. And
it makes you better doing the thing for yourself eventually. I mean, it's a selfish act. And I approve that selfish act.
We're all artists. We're all innately selfish in some ways. We just want to put our ideas and have people see them.
Me. Okay, so what's going on? What can people see of yours? And I'll point everybody in the direction of where to find you. That'll be in all the details below. But give it all away now.
Well, I think I've kind of touched on a lot of it already. I am working on it. There's, the first Spider-Man book only recently came out, like in June. That's one thing I don't have on my desk is my own books. Everybody else's books I constantly flip through for inspiration. But
of course,
I am. I have it's called Animals Assemble, and that was out. It came out in June, so that's out right now. I have a second book that's already finished up, and that will be out at the beginning of January. So that Spider-Man will be hopping his way through the quantum realm and teaming up with a bunch of different Marvel heroes. And then I'm working on a third one where it's Spider-Man in space. And I guess you could probably guess who the team is going to be for that one without
sure.
It's pretty obvious, but that's that one will be out next year, following June. So that's
great.
Hopefully, we'll have that one finished, and I've got a tight schedule for that one. So I'm really hammering down, trying to get that one done in the next couple months.
How long are these books?
They're about 80 pages each.
Okay, cool.
So they're intended for young readers, similar to like with the Cleopatra and space books. They age up a little bit, each one, just not in terms of what's actually happening, but just in terms of like the vocabulary and the dialogue and stuff. So like, I try to each. I think if you can get through, the first one, then you're going to kind of level up your reading a little bit with book 2, and then again for book 3. And I like that idea of readers realize, like especially young readers, getting through a book and go, look at this, I read this, I completed this book. And then the parents like, you read what word, because not in terms of like it's a bad word, but it's like, like probably like an 8-syllable word or something. And that's how I learned a lot of vocabulary growing up, was just from the juxtaposition of words and pictures. And I didn't know exactly what that word meant, but I could figure it out based on the context clues that were right there on the page for me. And I love doing that in comics. I think that marriage of those two things is just so fun. So yeah, I'll have that. And then I have I'm working on this giant kind of 300-page opus of a graphic novel. It's we were talking about drawing the thing you're passionate of, even if maybe it's not not what people are really looking for right now. But I'm a huge, I grew up in, like I said, in the 80s, and I grew up on things like Indiana Jones and Goonies and these treasure hunting sort of adventure stories, and even like Ghibli with like Castle in the Sky, stuff like that. And I really wanted to do a story that wasn't those, but had that similar, the thing that really really gravitated towards me, what made it so fun to go on these adventures and try to find something that might exist but could not, and that's what I'm working on now. I'll probably spend about a year trying to, I have the whole thing almost completely penciled. So it's just a matter of there and polishing it up, really. Nice. Drawing it, coloring it. But I'm really excited about it. And I hope that that shows enough through the story that other people get excited about it too.
Do you have a publisher for that one already?
Yes. So that one will be through a publisher named Candlewick. And cool. So they've been great. They were gracious enough to let me pause on it a little bit so I could work on these Spider-Man books. So I'm also very eager to give them an amazing book because they've been so patient and kind with me as I've been working on these other things.
For me, the more graphic novels we can get out there, the better. I just think having contained stories that people can pick up and read and really fall in love with, the better, because it's just only going to make the market for that so much stronger in the long run.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Possible Adventures here in Florida, rumor is there's a Fountain of Youth somewhere down there. So maybe you can go strap on your hat and go find it.
Yes. My one of the things I love to do, I have 2 boys, and the oldest, we like to do this thing called geocaching. Not now, not when it's 150 degrees outside. Geocaching, where it's little treasure hunts, that you find, that people there's people that hide these little containers full of maybe like stickers or cards or whatever, and we love these little treasure hunt excursions called geocaching, and that was one of the inspirations for the story
that's cool. Yeah, I think I probably would have been all over that as a kid if that was a thing.
Yeah. I'm all over it as an adult. I think it's just the funnest thing. It's that sounds very I think to me it sounds fascinating. But I heard the rumor is you have to find a mythical manatee and ride a mythical manatee to the Fountain of Youth. Yeah, I think that's what it is. That's about right. Yeah.
Hey, you want to hear the worst joke since we've brought up the subject of manatees? And there's a coworker who one day he just like in the middle of the office goes, "Hey, I've got an idea for a new comic book character. He's a man who was bitten by a radioactive manatee. He's half manatee, half human, and he's called the Humanity." And people, when they see him, they yell, "Oh, the Humanity."
Why is that been a thing? I feel like that should already be a thing.
Why is that not a thing?
It's like a throwaway character, and like the Harley Quinn cartoon or something. Like I guess I'm surprised that nobody's done that yet.
It works on every level.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so good. So
if you didn't tell me that joke, I'd steal it right now.
I tell you, it's a good one. Listen, I stole it from somebody else, so there you go. Thank you, Ken. It's a classic. I've been retelling that joke for almost 20 years now, so it's pretty good.
Oh, and I I haven't even heard it, so it's still
Oh
fresh.
yeah. I mean, you didn't work in graphic design companies in New York City through the 2000s. So, well, man, this has absolutely been a pleasure. I'm super excited to have spent this time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was
yeah, no, it was great, and super thankful for your openness on all the process and the struggle that happens to be creating stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, all right, cool. And are you doing any cons for the rest of the year, or are you?
I'm going to be at Bedrock City. It's a collection of comic shops in the Houston area. Cool. I'll be there at the beginning of October. It's on my list of things to confirm. It's just like if it's an actual comic convention type event, or if it's more of a signing. I think it's kind of both. So, anyways, I'll be in Houston. I'll also be in Chattanooga a couple weeks later for a Chattanooga comic convention.
Oh wow! When is that?
That is in the middle of October. I want to say dates, but I'll probably mess them up. I'm only about 3 days ahead of myself in any given day. Sure. Without Apple Calendar, I wouldn't know what's going on. But it's like the third weekend, I think, of October. I think it's the weekend after New York City Comic Con. And kind of close. I don't know I might be there too, but if I'm there, I'll just be doing some signings and stuff like that. Yeah.
Cool. Right on. Well, good luck with Spider-Man, and good luck with your adventure story. I can't wait to read them. Yeah, Mike. Have a good, I guess, rest of your afternoon. All right.
You too. Yeah, thanks, Alex.